I don't think there's anything that has been administered to this amount of humans in this amount of time, right? So if it was bad, it wouldn't be like you hear it from somebody, right? Like that's
but it was a lot of things were reported where people.
What do you mean by a lot? That's the part that I don't get. Like
I see what you're saying.
In Spain, there's been like 80% of the population had got it. What's a lot? Like, I mean, when you have like real consequences, where are those people? Like, I don't know what the specific consequences we are talking about.
Tony, how you doing, brother?
Great. How are you doing?
Let's start with something that you might be less comfortable with, but I think it's important to set up the reason for me wanting to talk to you aside from being a good friend. Mm-hmm. You've done quite a bit in your life, but you never wear your accolades on your sleeve. Actually, your main focus is on friends and enjoying life and art and things like that, but you're an extremely capable person. So I wanted to maybe run it by the audience just a little bit about how you started, and then we can go to present moment. We can talk about some fun things. So you, if I understand correctly, you started from medical school, right?
I started from engineering, actually. I did my master's here in Spain in telecommunications, although I ended up working on building medical devices. So basically CAT scans, which is X-ray tomography, and PET scans, which is positron emission tomography. So I started building the hardware, and then this is for animals, so for preclinical studies, not for humans. Those take more people to build, but animal imaging systems are small enough that I could actually build that by myself. So I started building the hardware, and then as part of that, I had to also build the software. So when you are taking, so basically tomography is reconstructing the 3D, like the volumetric kind of like distribution of something. So in X-rays is density, in PET is actually the concentration of whatever is the substance that has the radioactive marker. So you start with 2D projections, right? Because that's what you are seeing through. And you have to get back to the kind of like the 3D distribution of whatever it is of interest. And that was for me more interesting than the hardware. I mean, building hardware is very fun, but it's also very frustrating. That's the nature of building things.
Reality disagrees very often.
Yes, exactly. It's very stubborn. So I got more interested in the software side, and so that's kind of like what I did here in Spain, and we did a number of interesting experiments with the scanners that I built, but more interesting for me was how to get better at retrieving the signal from whatever it is that the scanner is actually getting, which is kind of like a scrambled version of what you actually are after, right? In the case of X-rays, it's scrambled mostly by geometry, because you are projecting through many layers of what you actually want to get.
Scramble is the term that is used?
No, the actual term is transformed.
Transformed. Okay, so it's almost like a triangulation. The software kind of guesses according to some parameters that you're setting up for it. Is that correct?
No, it's in X-rays. It's just a matter of inverting the transformation, kind of, because you can kind of like prove that the thing is invertible if you get all the views. Okay. Actually, interesting part about this is that the first kind of like framework for inverting the X-ray tomography was discovered, I don't want to say invented, discovered by Radon, who predates anything about tomography. So you had somebody somewhere thinking about integral transformations, right? And imagine, okay, well, what would happen if we just take linear projections of to the object? Can we get back what's in the center? And he solved that actually using a different transformation, which is the Fourier transform. The French were pretty good.
That's the Fourier transform, yeah.
Transform.
So basically, through mathematics, somebody already figured out that this was possible before any instrument that could be built.
And it was just a mathematical imprecision. There was no practical utility for what he was doing. As a matter of fact, like this was rediscovered once they were actually building the tomograph, right? Which
and for the audience, just the Fourier transform is essentially when you take a complex wave and you're trying to derive all the other waves that gave rise, of which this wave is a average of, right? So like you take a complex wave and Fourier transforms allows you to see, is it made out of other waves that are different, right? That's essentially what it is.
Yeah. Okay. So the Fourier transform is basically after realizing that if you take a number of sinusoids or like
sine waves,
sine waves with different amplitudes and frequencies, if you take enough of them, you can reconstruct any possible pattern, right? So what the Fourier transform does is give me one particular function, and I'll give you what is the composition in frequencies and phases that gives you that. So what the Radon transform does is basically saying, well, it's difficult to get this into the, right? So almost everybody has seen an X-ray scan, right? So you see a cat, right? Like tomography is literally the imaging of cats, tomography. And if you give me the projections, I can find the mapping through the Fourier space to back to the other space.
To basically translate it back, yeah.
So that's,
and just so that I don't want to linger too much here because I want to keep going also with your life, but out of curiosity, how does it know? Because if you have one sine wave, right, it can be an average of a lot of different kinds of other waves, right? How does it know that it was these particular waves that gave rise to it?
Well, it can only be one.
Oh, really? Only one variation of?
Yeah.
Oh,
So
interesting.
The reason why Fourier transform works is because the kind of like the Fourier basis is an orthonormal basis. So I'm not going to get into
Yeah, it's too complex. But okay, but
there's only one. There's
only one way.
solution. Yes.
Okay, interesting. Okay, I didn't know that.
So then go to a different type of problem, which is still using X-rays, which is supposedly geometry, which is what if you don't get all the projections needed, right? So at that point you are getting into estimation, and there's a practical reason why you want to do that, just to kind of like get less radiation for getting the same image, right? And once you get there, you start looking at estimation, right? So, okay, I don't have all the projections, but I have some way of kind of like extrapolating what I'm not seeing, right? So that, well, extrapolating or interpolating depending on which space you're looking.
What is the most likely thing is where I'm not seeing?
Right. The point so it is interpolation if you see, like if you see an incomplete signal, but you see it like both ways, kind of like you're filling the gap. It is extrapolation if you go further towards what you haven't seen, right? So it's like the difference between like filling a hole and filling the outside of
what might be outside of it. Interesting. Yeah. So that's a much more complex process, I would assume.
Well, the funny part is that when you are like in the kind of in the image space, you might be extrapolating, but sometimes in the frequency space, you are kind of interpolating because you actually see all frequencies around. So it depends. So that is a what is it? Distinction without a difference, right? Because it depends on your frame, basically. But the point is that I went to more towards estimation, but still there was not much noise because X-rays are kind of like a very clean signal in a way. So from that, I moved to building this PET scan. Totally for the PET scan, I didn't build that much. I built more on the kind of like on the estimation side. But that's more how to say, less determined problem because it's much more noise and less signal, right?
So would that rest heavier on the software or no?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So as you get more and more into less signal to noise ratio, there has to be more kind of like heavy lifting in understanding what's signal and what's noise, and also kind of like having some kind of prior on what type of things you can find, right?
And by the way, that was already during a time where some forms of AI were already present that you could use, or it was like very, very in its infancy?
Okay, let's talk about what AI is, and then,
sure.
and then we go through that.
Yeah.
Because I don't like AI is a very, it's an overused undefined term, right? So there was a lot of statistical inference, there was a lot of machine learning. Actually, most of the tools that we use now very successfully, I mean, they were available, they were just not working well, right?
So there were LLMs, but they were not...
There were not LLMs, but there were neural nets. There were multi-layer neural nets, but we had, like at the time, and that was before like Hinton did his magic, like kind of like figuring out backpropagation and all the other tricks that, well, so all the building blocks of neural nets were there, but the techniques to train them weren't as good. I mean, good is not the right term.
They were not robust enough, I think.
Yeah, like they were amplifying errors more than necessary. So, and also they were computation intensive and so on. So computation is less of a problem because we've grown in our ability to compute, but also like the way to actually estimate specifically backpropagate errors, right? Which is because they are iterative. Were just not invented. So all the tools were there. It wasn't called artificial intelligence, or maybe it depends on who you ask. It would be called. So at least like when I was studying, there was like artificial intelligence. Out of that, machine learning is one part, but there were a lot of rule systems. There's a lot of like it's just like right now, like there's a specific way of machine learning that is very successful and actually pretty much successful in every field, right? But back then, you could say, well, neural net might be good for images, rule system might be good for kind of like speech generation and so on. It's just only recently that we have found like a way to kind of like solve all problems with kind of like the same technique, right?
And what would be the one underlying method or term that goes under went under all of these tools? Would that be neural nets? Would that be deep learning, or not necessarily? These were like completely separate.
No.
Is there a process from which all of these things arise? There's not one process, right?
Right. So currently, the transformer architecture and with other modifications is the most successful by far, but that's not necessarily going to be the case continuously, right? Like there are other approaches that rely on just different frameworks that may or may not be more helpful later. But I guess like my point is that I don't know what artificial intelligence exactly means. That's more of an output metric. It's not a technique, right? It's just like, okay, can we make something artificial that shows intelligence? And that's very, very, very general.
And this is one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you, because I feel that there's a lot of confusion nowadays about all this stuff that exists and where it's going, including for myself. Like, you know, as much as I get interested in these things, I think the specifics really matter. So let's finish running through the timeline of what you did.
I'm very early in.
Yeah. I know. So from the CAT scan, you developed some kind of a technology that then, and obviously correct me where I'm getting it wrong, that they then basically gave you a ticket to then you went from there to Harvard or MIT or.
Yeah, so I moved. So I moved from Spain after getting my master's, starting my PhD, but not.
The PhD was in engineering?
It was an engineering.
Mechanical engineering or software engineering? Or?
So the one that I didn't finish was probably electrical engineering. So here in Spain it's called telecommunications, but like the closest is electrical engineering and computer science. I moved to Boston to work in a research lab doing optical tomography. So there, things get kind of like even more fun in terms of how to de-scramble the signal, because so basically the advantage of optical tomography is that there's no radiation involved, and also that you can use fluorophores, so substances that absorb light in one frequency and emit them back in a different frequency. So if you do that and you use filters and you see like only the frequencies that you are interested in, thanks to, in this case, not the Fourier transform, just kind of like solid filters, but same principle. You can see the biodistribution of whatever it is that you are tagging, right? So that's very interesting for seeing the bioavailability of specific substances, the kind of like the development of cancer and so on, because you can do repeated measurements. You are not kind of like,
because you're not radiating.
Yeah, you're not giving a lot of radiation to the animal, so you can do it many times. But then the problem you have, so you work in the near infrared, because that's where we are most transparent. We, like biological beings, right? Like everybody has put like a flashlight in their hand. What comes on the other side is red for a reason, right? We are more transparent there. Not very, but more. But because light scatters, right, and diffuses in tissue, and then you actually have a much bigger problem trying to get where did this, so okay, I'm seeing light on the other side, but this might have bounced back in very many different ways, but you do have a prior of how the light diffuses, so you can try to invert that. So I did that for a bit, like for a year, built my last hardware piece, and then I got into the PhD program at Harvard and MIT. So that Harvard and MIT have like a joint program, so I could do medicine, which I wanted to do, and engineering, which I always learned.
Did you ever aim towards like medicine, as in like potentially maybe becoming a doctor, or that was never your aim? You just wanted to kind of be in the maybe biotechnical research, or was that more the aim?
Well, I grew with my mother and my father are both physicians, so I've always been interested in that. And then I worked in the summers in like my father's hospital, just like moving beds and whatnot, but at the same time, and like looking at these amazing pieces of engineering that we have in hospitals, and that's what really kind of like interested me. But I wanted to know enough medicine so that I know like how are things actually used and what's their purpose, and And I think like only understanding like your like end users, which are the doctors and clinicians that use them, I could do a good job. So I moved to MIT. I did a number of things there. So I started working. Along with my kind of like PhD requirements, I worked for a year in a retinal implant project. So there was a professor, John Wyatt, that was like trying to build an implant that would let people with macular degeneration or with other kind of impediments in the retina to see again. So that kind of like moved me closer towards neurons. And that for a year, and then I changed to the lab of Emery Brown, who works more on the. So Emery is very gifted person. Is both an anesthesiologist in the Mass General Hospital, which, by the way, is the place where the first anesthesia was given.
Oh, really?
Surgery. I believe that's the case. Yes. So where everything started. But he's very interested in the fundamental mechanisms for anesthesia. And as you think about that, that's in part about what makes you conscious, because anesthesia makes you unconscious.
It's a huge part of it, yeah. What part of the brain is actually conscious?
Exactly. What part or what process or what is the actual kind of like telltale sign of somebody being unconscious. And this is both philosophically interesting but also clinically relevant, because anesthesia is multiple things, right? Like it makes it so that you cannot move voluntarily. It makes it so that you don't feel pain. It makes it so that you don't remember. And all of those things have to happen. I'm not sure if I'm missing another part right now.
But these are separate elements that are addressed separately, but they all have to happen in tandem and synchronize perfectly.
They happen. They have to, right? Because if you and this happens, if you cannot move,
but you can feel,
even if you don't remember, you have trauma. If you cannot move and you can feel and you remember, then it's a really bad situation, right? And there are, it's not often, but these things happen. And trying to reduce the frequency of those involve having a clear way of actually assessing if somebody is or isn't conscious under anesthesia, right? So it's not just like that your vitals are stable. You have to actually have some kind of sense of whether that's happening or not. So Emery is a...
And there's no, at the moment at least, nothing is being, like in the OR, there's nothing from the actual cortex that is projecting onto a screen to show that the person might be conscious still, or they do.
There are, so first of all, like I haven't looked at this field in like 10 years. So there may be better ways now. I'm pretty sure that there are. But even when he was working on that, there were a number of like systems. But it's just so hard to prove that the thing is working, right? How do you?
You only know until the person wakes up and tells you, basically.
And even then, how are you sure? But anyhow, like there were a number of ways of looking at this based on I'm just quoting from memory, but like on the ratios of specific frequencies, right? So we have a number of like theta, delta, and like a number of kind of like rhythms in the brain. And there was at least like one one way of monitoring this that had to do with these rhythms, but still it's kind of like you want to know how, right? Like, I mean, like if you like, understanding is different than, okay, well, we found anecdotally that this is correlated, right? Like,
Yeah, some correlation versus knowing the mechanism by which all this happens.
exactly. So Emerick work in different things. He work in like better functional neuroimaging. So, and that's where I was working on and talk about that. But also in better, because he's also a statistician, right? A very gifted mathematician. So better systems for imaging, also like clinical work, but also better like inference methods. So actually, like just basically like kind of like mathematical frameworks for describing the neural activity. Right? Neural activity is not the type of process that typically, especially in engineering, like has focused on. Actually, I was talking to you about this the other day. So the way we think, because some people that, and also we think now, the way we think that neurons relay information is mostly by the timing of their axon potentials, right? So the way that neurons work is very, in a way, is digital, right? Because you create, like the way you create the axon potential, you create this like kind of like self-amplified signal that goes through the axon. It's kind of like, if you create it, then that's that. It's going to be pretty similar.
If it goes over a certain threshold, then it will fire, right?
Yeah, and there's a wave, and it gets to the end, and like in the synapse, it's going to just basically open or not. And again, this may be all further defined by science later, but that's how we understand it. So the way we understand it is that because the axon potentials are pretty much the same, right?
When they fire, you mean?
Exactly. The only thing that matters is when, right? So the timing of them, that's an arrival process, or you can call it different things. The point is that the mathematics of describing these arrival processes is that's the part that Emerick was working on, at least like when I was in the lab. So kind of like he had all of this.
So basically, for the layman, he was working on the deep theoretical and applicable mathematical frameworks to describe the statistical probability of propagation of signals in the brain, basically.
Yeah, and how to do inference on that, so that when you are actually looking at the signals, you have a way of saying, well, is this, for example, is this caused by this specific pattern or whatever it is, right? So many things.
By the way, before I continue, that's an interesting point that I want a clarification for myself. Aside from the action potentials and the waves that it creates, it's kind of like the field of neurons. Isn't there also a type of more over-encompassing wave, like almost like a standing wave that oscillates in different frequencies, that also responsible for some kind of communication in the brain? Or am I misunderstanding this?
Well, those rhythms are not generated by that I know of, by anything but the coordinated kind of like activity.
So they are still the average of all the... Yeah. Okay, got it.
I mean, like there are, I know that the Purkinje cells in the cerebellum work different, but all the rest of the brain is kind of just axon potentials, right? So I was working on getting better estimates for electroencephalography and magnetoencephalography. So specifically, in my case, for somatosensory mapping on epileptic patients, right? So when you have epilepsy and it doesn't respond to medication, then you have to have surgery, but that surgery is mostly trying to kind of like remove whatever is the focus of like the initial part of your brain that generates this kind of like
The misfiring.
Yeah.
So you have to literally, with surgery, you have to remove that part. But then you have to isolate what part exactly it is. You don't want to remove too much of the brain.
Yeah.
How much can you remove and still get the result?
And also what it is that part of your brain is doing, because there is a trade-off, right? And that's so that's why specifically I was working more on the somatosensory, because you know, when you when you have to trade off, you know, being paraplegic with having epilepsy, you want to know with our right? So basically two things that you want to do. One is trying to map where it is that the epileptic attack starts, and that's very hard to do in the scanner because you don't know when it's going to start. And the other thing is what it is that particular area is working on. So the way you do that is axon potentials can be generated halfway through the axon. So typically they go from like the kind of like the base of the axon towards the end. But if you induce it halfway through the axon, they propagate both ways. So
And what does that do?
So basically you get kind of like a magnetic bracelet that will generate the kind of like the potential difference that triggers the axon potential, but you do it kind of like halfway through the wrist. You have like very long axons in the median nerve. So it does two things. One is it clenches your fist, but it also sends the signal back to the brain.
Okay, but explain what this achieves, because it's not that obvious.
So you are sitting down in the scanner, and when you actually elicit the axon potential, you are looking for, okay, what's going to light up in your cortex. Right?
Oh, I see. So that way you know.
That way you know that's the part that is innervating.
You're basically activating the path, so you see what the path is connected to. Interesting.
Exactly.
Because otherwise it will be only one way, and then you can't see what the...
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And surprisingly, that takes a number of milliseconds to arrive in your brain. So you think no, you perceive your movements to be instantaneous, but there's a delay, always, right? Yeah,
but is it
it's
really
longer than you think.
Right. Well, is it really relevant to like a speed of a movement of a person? Milliseconds are not really.
Yeah. But the part that is interesting to me is that consciously you think you are moving exactly at that time.
Which is Benjamin's Lebet, his experiments with the cortex, right? We basically open people's skulls, right, but they were alive, and then they would stimulate a finger, or they would stimulate the nose, and they would see that there's actually, even though if you put your finger to your nose, there's obviously a longer path that the nerves have to take, the signal have to take from the finger, but your brain reconciles it. It makes it look like... When you done telling me about this, I do want to ask you something about that experiment, because there's something there that I find very troublesome, but please finish this thought first.
Yeah. So the point is that simultaneity is a construct. And there's I think it's a Neil Seth's book. He mentions this experiment that I find.
On Being You, I think.
Yeah.
It's a great book.
This very recommended. This experiment where the experimental condition is you're pressing a button and seeing a light that goes, right? And what they do is, as you keep pressing the button whenever you want, they keep increasing slowly the delay between the pressing and the light, but you adapt to it, and then at some point suddenly they get it back to nothing, and your experience is that the light goes before you press the button, but when you press.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Wait, do you remember what the longest period of,
I don't know.
this is actually the great point to ask you about the Benjamin Lemit's experiment, because basically what he allegedly proved is that the conscious entity that we believe ourselves to be, that we believe is making the decisions, what he discovered is that signature of being me is not making these decisions. And the way he knew that is because now these experiments have been run in any possible way. Basically what scientists see is that if they read directly from your cortex into a screen through some kind of a device that usually it's EEG or functional MRI, or what is EEG usually?
Yeah, I doubt so almost, yeah. fMRI has a very long, like it's actually in terms, I mean, it depends on like the intensity of the field and so on, but the temporal resolution is not great. That's actually what I was doing.
I see.
We can talk about that later, but because it relies on the hemodynamic response, so the signal that fMRI is looking at is the increasing oxygenation of the kind of like the vessels around a specific area.
So it's a vaguer picture, but what is the benefit of it?
And it trails, so basically first you have the activation, well actually this is a little bit disputed, but almost surely. You have the activation and then you have an increase in blood flow, right? So the dynamics of that hemodynamic response take time, so you can't just exactly see. Whereas when you are looking at EEG and imaging, you are looking at just the electrical field, which is exactly the time.
So it has to be EEG, okay.
It's better temporal resolution, but then the problem with EEG is that it's much more spatially blurry.
Okay, but then, so by using EEG, what they discovered is that if you're looking at the screen and I'm reading your brain, there's a dial running, and then you have to, your only job is to see when is the moment where you decided to stop it or decided to pick between two different things. Mm-hmm. And there's a way, and this is the part that I want to ask you about, where the person is convinced that they made the decision, and the way we know is because their job is to press the button when they think they made the decision. So when they press the button, the researchers already know, sometimes milliseconds, sometimes up to something like 8 seconds, or that's something crazy, like maybe a couple of seconds, where they know before you made the decision what decision you're about to make. My question about that is, just like with the light, right? How do we really know that the perception of the person was the real time of that decision that they thought they made? Or is the point is that what we're measuring is their conviction about where the decision is made? So that's the relevant part, right?
Yeah, I think you're measuring, I mean, this gets into a completely different part that has nothing to do with experiments.
Wait, which part?
That's only what I'm going to say. It can only be much later, right? So meaning something makes the decision, and the decision is made right in your mind.
So like there's let's call a decision a path of no return. Like it's now going in this direction and no other direction.
But you can't possibly know that yet. Like you cannot be aware of it.
Right.
Because you have to be aware, exactly. Like it takes time from the decision to the awareness of the decision to the signaling of the movement and so on, right? I mean, this is not about meditation, but the more you think about what you as awareness are aware of, those things need to be prior to the actual awareness, right? I think like many people think about like, well, I made a decision, but there's not.
It's just a story about you making a decision.
Exactly, that can't possibly be.
But then it basically renders consciousness as almost, or awareness of the self. Let's say consciousness might be broader, but awareness of the self, it makes it almost like an epiphenomena. It's almost like the smaller detail end of the pipe. Like it's not even, it's just kind of like a result of much deeper processes, but then it doesn't actually have any agency at all. Like it doesn't actually decide, it doesn't back propagate to the neurons and say, no, actually let's do something else now because I was aware of it.
I think it does.
It does?
But like towards the future, not in the present, right?
Oh, so it modifies the behavior of the
You
future.
are a witness of what happens. There's a lot of things that happen in your body that you are not aware of because it will be exhausting, right? Like you can't possibly be aware, or maybe you can, but it's not. It doesn't make sense evolutionarily, right? As like this kind of like system 1, system 2 thinking. You don't need to overthink everything. Otherwise, you couldn't walk out of the door. You couldn't drive. You couldn't ride a bicycle.
If you would have to beat your own heart, it would get very exhausting very quickly.
Yeah, I'm boring. So we delegate, right? But there's necessarily, there have to be building blocks that get to the decision, and I don't even understand what it would mean for you to be aware of those building blocks, because awareness is a much more complex process than those, right? So
well, it gets into the whole free will discussion, right? Where you can't even possibly describe a world in which free will makes even sense, or in the sense that we think of it. Like there's no world that you can describe even potentially in which somehow you're the prior actuator of the thing that gives rise to the next stage as the conscious unit, because then that means you're somehow, you are the beginning of the universe, like you're conscious, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like I think, I mean, the problem in that description is who is you. If it's you as an aware, an awareness, or whichever way you want to call this kind of like
Whatever this is.
wonderful experience machine we have, this theater of experience, it's impossible that is free. If you get back to, well, your kind of like physical system body, then there's no free will either, because there's no will, right? Like the will is in the awareness. So it's
because if there's a will, that means it's a separate entity from everything else that sits outside and decides for the everything, and then it's just one system that basically propagates.
Yeah,
right.
It helps us to think that we, as the awareness, are deciding, but that can't possibly be true. That's the
Yeah, I love this subject, but so
let's keep going.
Yeah, let's keep going. This is great. We're making a little pit stops there. So after you worked with that professor that you were describing, the anesthesiologist and the mathematician, what was your next step in the building of your career?
Yeah, so I mean, we actually touched on this. Like I did my PhD in basically estimation methods for EEG and MEG, so that I could get kind of like the best of combining those two signals. And in order to do that, you have to impose more and more priors, right? So I mean, I think now the word will be like inductive biases. So you have to constrain the space of solutions so that you actually get better estimates, right? And I did that using state space models, which are basically ways of describing the dynamics of a system one step at a time, right? You know, the dynamic, well, in the static in a particular, so you know, a frame of the movie, and I mean, this happens, right? Like frame after frame of a given movie, they cannot be very different because that's just noise. So there are priors in the world, and there are priors also in the when you are trying to estimate like electrical activity in the brain, which is like what you are measuring with AGI and MEG. You know that it cannot be just like moving all around, because everything has a a time limit, right? Like neurons tend to have some type of coordinated activity in order to actually get the message. You are not seeing every neuron's activity. You're actually only seeing parts of the cortex that are very activated. So it has to be multiple neurons activated so that you can actually detect some kind of magnetic field outside, and that doesn't happen just kind of like at random, but like there's specific areas that light up and so on. So I work on that for my thesis, right? When I was about to graduate, we were like 2009, I think, very bad with years. Spain. So I was thinking of going back to Spain, but Spain was kind of like coming out of the 2008 like mortgage crisis, right? And first, kind of like the situation didn't look great to come back to Spain. Second, I wanted to kind of like work in the US. And third, a big part of this crisis was about how we were measuring, or rather not measuring, the kind of like the system level risks of collateralized mortgage instruments, right? Like they were like kind of bundling mortgages that had a given risk of default, and then kind of like making them always in like, good. Like, so you get a bunch of mortgages, and then you say, well, I'm going to sell the good ones to as whatever AAA, and the bad ones triple B or whatever. I don't remember the actual. The point is like the people that got the triple B could also get them all together and start doing it again and again and again.
Didn't they also mislabel them? That like they gave the triple B, a triple A, what would you call it? A label. Like they labeled it as triple A, even though it was a much worse. Much higher risk, wasn't it? Wasn't it part of the scam? Wasn't that what was part of?
I think there were two different things. So one was about underestimating the kind of like the systemic risk, meaning assuming that there were more.
So I'm saying that the company that gave the labels, there was a company responsible for assessing that risk. They were the ones that were fudging some of the data.
I'll get to that's the second one.
Okay.
So well, there's one about like underestimating the coupling of it, right? So like if the market breaks, everything goes. So yes, there was one part that was like on the kind of like on the mathematical modeling, and there was a very big part in you just create an industry, don't regulate it, and get people giving mortgages with poor due process, fake or non-existent documentation, know your customer, and so on. So, but I was not going to help in the latter. So on the first one, I thought about going to Wall Street to do like to help on the mathematical model validation, right? So I went to the what's it called? Giant vampire squid, Goldman Sachs. I think it was like about that time that was it Mark Tahimi, or what's the name of anyhow? The writer of the
right.
Came with the So I decided to go
the whole movie of The Big Short, right before the.
Among others, yeah.
The what?
Among others.
Yeah.
There's been a number of these, no? But the I think Liar's Poker is the book. Anyway, there's
what is that? Liar's Poker.
Yeah,
interesting.
But I think that one is about bond trading. Anyhow, like once it has gone through a number of these, right? So, so I decided to go there, but like for the kind of like the controlling function. So,
to the good side of Wall Street.
Yeah, I mean, to the I don't think there's a good side or a bad side. Like I think Wall Street is a consequence of how we create markets, because markets are never free. Markets are a set of rules that we impose, right? Like this is how much of a monopolistic position you can get. This is how much, right? Like we can break down companies if they grow too much. We can protect companies if we think they shouldn't go under. So like markets are always regulated, and because of the specific regulation we have, well, Wall Street is the most successful in getting profit out of it, but the rules are not actually written by them.
But you know, and I know this is like a very kind of like a sophomoric liberal point, but I do think that it has some merit behind it. Don't you think that in the largest picture, it is not a good idea to aim towards profit without actual productivity behind the profit? So like if the profit is out of just playing the markets versus creating a good or something that has to do, you know what I mean? Like, or you feel that that's too low-hanging fruit of a point?
That's a very simplified way of looking at it.
So can you give a little bit of like a deeper why, let's say that's not necessarily the case, or?
Yeah. So finance helps in many different ways, right? So yes, I'm charging you, for example, for a loan, but I'm making it possible for you to buy a house. Or yes, I'm charging you some money for for a put option, right? Like the option, but not the obligation of selling something at a future time. But that can help somebody that is growing corn to have stable income, because they know they can sell, right? At the end of whatever is the harvest season, and that kind of like smooths out the field for people that have uneven streams of money.
In case something happens to the yield, let's say.
No, not just that. In case already something happened and I didn't have like a good harvest, but I want to keep doing my business and I want to secure, right? Like so I think finance has a way of kind of like smoothing out effects that are not great. And I don't think governments do this better, right?
So it's almost like security blankets that we create that average the spikes, so nobody really goes under too much.
Or somebody does, and the people that shouldn't go don't, right? Like so meaning shouldn't.
Yeah.
But the point is, if somebody has a good case for I need the money now, right? You can give it to them. Or if somebody has a good case of I don't know, I have a position in the market that where I need to hedge risks, right? Like you're a company and you are in the business of whatever it is, selling widgets, but you are not in the business of FX trading, right? Like how do you say? Foreign exchange, right? So you don't know anything about what the pound is going to do with respect to the dollar, but you want to sell your widgets in the UK from the US, and you just don't want that part of the risk because you are not going to hire somebody, then you just go to a type of product that helps you hedge that risk at a price. So instead of paying somebody to manage that, you just buy an instrument that helps you do that. So there's a number of reasons why some financial instruments are good. The question is, until which point and which applications and so on, is not an easy problem. So, I don't think that finance is intrinsically evil, although it is a powerful thing. So is
so there was somebody who's closer to that power. It's almost like the ring in Lord of the Rings, like too much power. So I guess the real question becomes, which is the thing that you want to do, which is how do you create a better regulation of the people who are creating this product?
Yeah,
Okay.
And it's always going to be difficult because it's easier for Wall Street to hire than for the government to hire. Right? That's almost always going to be the case. Better life, better car, I guess. Right? So anyhow, I don't know that particularly. Yeah, like I think it's a
No, that's very informative. Thank you for sharing. Okay, so then you went to do that.
Yeah, so I spent I only spent a year there because actually I ended up a little bit disillusioned with the. I mean, it's a very interesting problems, but ultimately very very difficult for me to feel like I could make a difference. Right? You are not going to be the person calling the shots. You are going to always be, I mean, and there's good work on like trying to contain the kind of like the risk taking on the bank side, but not very fulfilling. So I did that for a year, and then I went to Netflix, which at the time. So Netflix did something very interesting, which was...
So by then you finished your PhD, right?
I finished my PhD, then I did Goldman. Then I went to work for Netflix. I had a friend of mine that had been a friend that I really admired from MIT that had started working there. Netflix had been made very famous because of this Netflix challenge that they did, kind of like an X Prize type of thing, where they were offering some very smart thing to do. They were offering, I think it was $1 million for anybody that could improve their recommendation algorithm by 10% or so. And they did that while I was still in my PhD. And what they got with that is many, many university groups interested in solving that problem, right? And that created a lot of very interesting like mathematical tools for doing what was called kind of like collaborative filtering. So, you have many users enjoying your content, and so if I want to recommend a movie to you, I can just at the same time trying to solve for who is like you in terms of consumption, and what it means to be like you in terms of what are the groups of kind of items that people like you is consuming. So it's actually you are solving both at the same time.
So literally you people.
Exactly. So I knew about the problem. It was very interesting to me, and yeah, I decided to start working there. So I started working on the recommendation algorithms, kind of like prototyping and building, kind of like on the research side at first, right? So prototyping what would later be the algorithms that you use to like build the rows or actually build the homepage and so on. And I did that, I think I want to say 4 years, but again, years, it's not my fault. You can put it in subtitles here. So I started on the research group, ended up leading the research group for recommendations, and that was such a fun time. Again, you could argue it's good or bad, like we are optimizing for quality watching time, so users watching or finding and watching content that was interesting to them, but also kind of like getting them tied to the couch. Yeah. I think and Reed has changed this, but he used to say that Netflix competition was sleep, which is not necessarily something I would support. but he doesn't anymore. People should sleep. But that was very fun because it's, that was like actually no, Goldman in a way was the first time that I had access to kind of like large amounts of data, right? So
In Netflix, you mean?
no, in Goldman.
Oh, in Goldman Sachs.
But it was a different type of data, right? So it just it was like only the kind of like the mark to market the prices that banks share so that they can calibrate each other and so on, but not as in terms of amount of data smaller, but also in terms of like how interesting, not the same. So, but Netflix was the I think the largest, but like the first time that I had like access to kind of like quality data from a product that you're building, right? And realizing how interesting it is to just kind of like optimize this dynamic system that you are creating, right? You're creating like, I mean, not a game, but like a little...
A gamified.
A little universe of possible actions, seeing what people are doing and trying to improve the product through whatever insight you can get. And that's pretty powerful. So that...
Did it also influence the type of content that Netflix bought?
Yeah.
Because, okay.
Yeah. Like, I mean, we never got, I think, I don't know what they are doing now. We never got to the point of, there was a lot of press interested or implying that Netflix was already creating scripts based on what the users liked. I couldn't discard that that's happening now, and that would be an interesting, maybe sad
Wait, why
development.
sad? I don't see that as sad. Like if you tailor shooting the type of, yes, you in the sense that it pulls people more to watch more TV, you mean?
No, in the sense of if a bot is writing the script.
Oh, a bot writing the
Humanity,
script. Got it.
I think
Okay.
humanity is missing out on something.
Yeah.
But what we were doing was, okay, among the content that is pitched, how much should we, given what our users like, how much should we be paying for a specific piece of content, right? And if you have an edge in properly pricing, then you are going to have a much better business, because at least at the time, and this actually shifted while I was there, but like Netflix was in the kind of like in the content distribution market, right? Like they were just getting a lot of different content offers, and they had to decide what to buy and have on the site. And but then as time went on, right, like they started with House of Cards. I think was like the big kind of like first Netflix original. Not that they didn't have others, but that was the one that was like kind of like produced by Netflix. From as you get more into content creation, then you can start doing more interesting things than just like pricing content. Okay? Like you can start saying, well, actually we should think about doing this type of show or this type with this type of actors and so on. So I might end up doing some of that, and I didn't.
So it wasn't fully present when you were there yet? That kind of data-driven content creation?
Not content creation, no.
But content mediation, yeah. Okay.
I would imagine that now it's more.
Yeah, I don't see any reason why not.
Yeah.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
But that is an interesting thought. If bots actually just take the data, write the script, can probably also already, with all these like organizing tools, they can probably already start organizing the teams of production and all that stuff. So
Yeah.
we're really entering this space of like Skynet a little bit.
Yeah, we. It's going to be interesting. It was very surreal for me to watch. I think it's the first Black Mirror episode of the last season. I don't know if you watched it.
I know of Black Mirror. I watched a few episodes, but
This one is about how's it called? It's called Flickberry or whatever it is. It's Netflix, but it isn't. The show is produced by Netflix. It has Netflix, and
A fake Netflix.
yeah, but like a fake Netflix that has. I don't want to ruin the solo for the episode for everybody, but let's say that it was just very surreal and it's great.
A lot of
I think it
applications to
was.
real life.
Yeah, I don't think the technology allows us to get there yet, but very interesting.
I mean, can't be that far away in the future.
Okay. This one, I hope it is.
Okay. Hope is good.
Exactly. So we were on Netflix. Then I went to work in Airbnb for a bit, working on machine learning applications for search. That didn't last that long. And after that, I went back to Netflix, where I was kind of overseeing all the movie recommendation algorithms, from kind of like research, implementation, testing, deployment.
And then from there, you decided to leave, I remember, and you started, you became part of a startup with a partner, right?
Yes. So I actually, what's the order here? So the order is like before I went, before I went back to Netflix. I wanna say this is the case. Yeah. So Netflix, then a small startup, Miraculous, one small, yeah, or like 9 people, working on. So at the very beginning, because of the technology we had, it was a microRNA based blood test for specific cancer types, and we're looking at gastric cancer. So there, the idea was that there's this specific type of non-coding RNA. In non-coding, it doesn't end up directly translated or transcribed.
One of the two.
One of the two. Into protein, but rather it just modulates other RNA that does get translated, right? So it like down regulates RNA. So for the longest time we thought, or for the longest time, for a very long time, we thought that it was, you have like your DNA in the cell nucleus that gets, and this is where I'm either translated or transcribed into messenger RNA, and that gets to the ribosome, and from the ribosome it's made into protein, right? And protein is the building block. And when we decoded like the human genome, we saw that there's many parts of the genome that don't have the kind of like the marking for like protein encoding and so on, and we didn't know what those were. And only recently we started knowing about microRNAs that, well, not just microRNAs, but in general, like epigenetics. There's a lot of things into our DNA that don't actually end up in proteins, but rather like regulate those. And the interesting part about microRNAs is that they're expressed everywhere. They have this kind of like interesting regulation function. They are very stable, so if they get out of the cell, which they do, you can kind of like detect them for long distances, meaning in the peripheral blood, you can see RNAs from wherever, from your brain, from your liver, because they're floating around and they're stable. And when you have specific types of cancer, the kind of the expression profile changes. So the point is that you can go into blood, look at microRNAs that are like tissue specific, see whether the ratios have changed, and try to use that to diagnose cancer without actually having to go into the particular organ. So we did that with gastric cancer for a while. So I worked there for like year and a half, doing kind of like the first validation studies, which worked well, but eventually decided to move on just because data wasn't as available as.
But so actually, before you move on, this is going to be a controversial part of the conversation for sure. But can you educate us a little bit, because you touched on the microRNAs and all that stuff, on, because you know how contentious this point is, and I believe it's not only in the US actually, but like worldwide, the whole RNA vaccines, the for COVID. What is it specifically that they innovated there, and why do you think? Well, why is obvious. Some people are just paranoid, but let's start with the, like, what it is that they innovated. Why was this vaccine different than any other vaccine that existed until today?
It is different because it's not a vaccine, it's a framework to build vaccines. And so when you think about like most of the vaccines that, I mean, for the longest time we had, so they were deactivated or weakened viruses, right? So you have the particular antigen, right, that your body is
producing
to react to, right? So, I mean, I don't know how much people know, but I guess like after COVID, they at least think they know more about this. But like your like our immune system is a learning machine, right? So that's why kids need to actually take everything into their mouths. They should, at least. Not everything.
Thanks for the clarification.
Just in case. Very much. And if we so specifically when you get this, when you get viruses that our immune system can fight, if our immune system gets training beforehand, you are already creating that particular antibody, right? That will attack this antigen, the antigen being a virus or whatever marker for the virus that the body sees that, okay, this shouldn't be here, right? So if you give them this kind of like training before, and that's where vaccines come from, then by the time that you get the virus, your immune system already has the machinery to defend against this virus, right? But many of the vaccines we had before, basically they work, okay, well, we are going to show you the motif, like we are going to show the immune system the motif, whatever it is, the marker that your antibody need, like for which the antibody has to be created, just in a weakened form, right? So you still get either the like parts of the cell of the virus or whatever it is that right?
Something to induce the production of the antibody.
So the virus, the whole virus is dangerous, but maybe a piece of the cell of the virus is not able to replicate, so you're not going to have a problem, but it's still detected as a threat, so that you create the antibodies, and then by the time that you get the full virus, then you're already ready, right? But that means that you have to figure out how to weaken the virus or break it, or you have to have the virus and so on.
How do you produce the ineffective version of the virus that will give enough the body enough of a signal to produce?
Do you bake it? Do you
cut
toast
the
it? Right, exactly. So it's like trial and error. But with RNA vaccines, you can just sequence whatever it is that you get about, and then put that, well, or the complement of that into the vaccine payload, right? So instead of saying, well, I'm going to build this, is I'm going to give you something that helps your cells produce just this motif, right?
So I'm literally telling the cells, make this.
Yeah, just this piece.
But I'm not introducing any part of the virus.
No, because it's
so I'm inserting a code
it's not getting into the nucleus. It's not getting into your DNA. So again, like DNA, RNA, protein, right? So you are here. So you are just making sure, like delivering into a cell, just the coding piece of the tiny piece that you want the immune system to react. And that's much more interesting for many reasons, because we know how to sequence, right? And so but I don't know, like most big viruses are RNA based or DNA based, right? So we know what to put in there. We can be much faster in the production and in the our reaction time, right? So if a new pandemic comes, it will be a matter of saying, okay, what is the sequence? Because all the rest is ready, right? And it was incredible that in a year, and that was not because we were, well, I guess partly because we were fast, but more importantly because these kind of like RNA-based vaccines were already something that we were studying for cancer, right?
Okay, so the research field already existed quite a bit. They just targeted it towards this particular thing and made sure they're okay, we need a breakthrough here.
Yeah, exactly. And the kind of like the standard vaccines just didn't make the cut because they couldn't move that fast, right? So that was a that was a happy accident, I guess.
I do want to ask you about that, because it does seem that I know that statistically the data show that still you're better off with the vaccine versus, like, even with the risks that the vaccine might impose, like cardiovascular issues or whatever it is that some people exhibited. But statistically, you're still better off doing this versus getting the disease that might still cause all these issues anyway, in a much less controlled. So I'm aware of all of that, but it does seem like, so you know the tip of the iceberg principle, right? So if something happens to, let's say, not just me, but like 5 people that I know, yes, it's possible statistically that it just happened to be a fluke that in my corner of the universe this happened a lot, and in some places it happened less. But it seemed to be true that a lot of people report where they do this. They know a lot of people that a lot of things went wrong for them quite a bit, and you don't believe that it's possible that a lot of the data was obfuscated or fudged to make the thing fit? You don't, like, in your view, it's not possible?
I don't think there's anything that has been administered to this amount of humans in this amount of time, right? So if it was bad, it wouldn't be like you hear it from somebody, right? Like that's
but it was a lot of things were reported where people.
What do you mean by a lot? That's the part I don't get. Like
I see what you're saying.
In Spain, there's been like 80% of the population had gotten it. What's a lot? Like, I mean, when you have like real consequences, where are those people? Like, I don't know what the specific consequences we are talking about. What I do know is that there were
blood clotting, strokes. So I take your point. Your point is that if in the population you, like, it would be much more robust and much more obvious, and you would have hospitals filled with right.
Exactly. Like or now, like, you will suffer like some kind of consequence. I mean, yeah, like literally, I don't think we've given something like, I couldn't be more sure about anything that we've given to the human race, because it was like, an insane amount of vaccines, and of course there was a risk, meaning we had to think about like exactly what to do because the situation wasn't great, right? But yeah, like, I mean, it's only like it's completely like it sounds like conspiratory thinking, right?
Well, I'll tell you from my experience, as someone who's not tending to drift towards a conspiratorial thinking, there was something very strange about how aggressively it was pushed, even when the pandemic started subsiding, and even with iterations of the boosters that were then discovered that were not even tested at all. Like, and that's in the books. This is not a conspiratorial thinking.
What do you mean they weren't tested?
They were not tested. They were just put out into the market, and they were actually pulled off the shelf. There was one version by Pfizer, I believe, that actually pulled off the shelf because later they did discover that there was some issues with it, and nobody ever talked about it again. It was just basically pulled off the shelves, and later it was discovered that that particular booster, it had went through no tests. It was just basically put out and
But
shipped.
what do you mean by, so sorry, I don't get it. The booster is just the same thing. So the booster is just one more dose.
There's no, they don't add variations to the.
No. I mean, they had to, as the virus evolved, which is what they do, right? Like they are, I mean, it's painful for us, but they are evolving on us, right?
Mm-hmm.
They had to kind of like slightly change the kind of like the motif because the virus was different, right? So like as you were getting like, I don't even remember anymore, Delta, Omicron, and so on. You wanted to make sure that it's kind of the same thing that we've been doing with the flu since forever, right? Like every year the flu vaccine is different,
Right.
because
But
the
it
flu
doesn't
is
need to be-
different every year.
Okay,
Yeah.
so just to let's get to like maybe help people understand. So the RNA, let's call it code or sequence that you're putting into it, it never goes to the DNA level and changes anything about the DNA.
I mean, not that we know of. Again, like as usual, right?
Yeah.
We only know what we know, right? We used to think that DNA was only to build proteins. Now we know that, I mean, there's many things, not about, but definitely that's kind of how we think that things happen. Now, I already told you that there are RNAs that do modulate the expression of other RNAs. So that could happen. Very unlikely that could happen exactly with this piece, but everything could happen. But I think like the most important thing for me is the weight of evidence. Like literally, you have multiple countries vaccinating most of their population, right? Who is keeping the secret at this point? Like, you know, like we are not, it's not that we are not talking, like I think like there's been a lot of studies about both the vaccine efficacy, and it's not a silver bullet. I mean, it was an amazing thing that we could get that in a year, right? Not just getting like, meaning like what to do, but logistically. But I like, you know, like I don't know, like we go and talk about like many different things that happened during that time, right? First of all, like medicine is as much an art as a science. It was a difficult time for everybody. It's not just the virus or the vaccine that were going on, right? Like we were going on through many difficult situations, right? Like people grieving while they were alone in their houses, people not being able to socialize, people not being able to do things that we also know that are very difficult for human beings to not do, right? Or to do. So.
And by the way, one of the counterpoints to all these, I know that there's some documentaries that came out, and one of them was, I never watched it, but people told me about it, where all of a sudden there was this crazy spike in people just literally dropping dead and like heart conditions, even for professional athletes. But then the counterpoint to that was that, you know, again, correlation doesn't mean causation. You can have a lot of variables, like because people were at home, maybe they ate more foods that cause more heart conditions. Maybe there's a tendency for more depression. Maybe there's a lot of variables that could have influenced this spike of whatever adverse effects that people are experiencing. So unless you can show a direct correlation, and I guess and this is to some degree, I'll be honest with you, like for me, maybe it's because it was under the banner of the American system, which, as you know, Americans are much more very protective of their personal freedoms, which in Europe it's maybe less pronounced. It's more, you know, like, yes, you have your personal freedom, but kind of like the collective good is much more emphasized versus like what I deserve, like as an individual. So in America, it really felt, even to me, it really felt like it was pushed too hard almost to a suspicious degree. And by the way, the motive was clear. It's not like I'm not subscribing to the whole idea that, you know, they were trying to implement like some kind of chips or try to kill part of the population. I'm like, that's just ridiculous. I mean, you can kill people with so many different creative ways that already exist today. You don't need that. If people think that this is to track them, I mean, you have your phone. You can track anybody with their phone, listen to them, do whatever. So that's not why would you do all of that, right? But the profit motive is a very clear one.
Not for everybody though. Like,
well, in America at least it was well, look at how much money these companies made, right? So it's okay that they made the money if it actually they put out a product that worked and saved a bunch of the population. That's fine. But I do see how it can easily go from, well, do we really need it that much right now to push it on people? No, the risk is already subsiding. But you know what? They don't know that. Let's just keep pushing it for another year. Like that's not a crazy thought for me. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but like intentions are a little bit. For me, it is a crazy thought. Like to think that that's the motivation.
At a point where it's a blurry, not at a point which is like clear cut. In a point where you know that it's almost like, you know, they say it's very difficult to convince somebody against what their job description is, right? So it's almost like it's not even like a mustache twirling evil people in the basement, like who cannot like conspiring against the population. It's more like you can make a decision either way. This means another $20 billion. This means less $20 billion. We're doing good. We're doing good. Let's push it. You know what I mean? Like that's.
But they are not calling this out. So I think that's a part of that.
So please explain.
So pharma companies are not the ones deciding what to do. They are not the ones validating, or at least suddenly, and mostly they aren't. I mean, there are always some corruption involved, but I don't think in this particular case that was possible. They don't get to decide. They get to give for the clinical trial the particular thing that is going to be tested. And then there are physicians and researchers conducting the study, statisticians. None of these people are on the pharma payroll. And then there's the government, because here it was mostly government officials, like having this conversation with the responsibles for the clinical trial about what should we do and what's the benefit and what's the risk. And I also think that there's a different way of looking at this, because I do think that even not in the US, in Spain, that was also the feeling, right? Of like, you know, this is too long, but I think like there's many factors in there. First, we're just not used to it. Right?
No, it was not that. It was not the long. It was the fact that you would lose your job unless you do it. That was, and by the way, just so you know, in New York, the Superior Court in New York, they reversed it, and in fact, they ordered that all the people, I don't remember if it was just in the medical field or all the people in general that were fired because of not taking vaccines, they had to be put back in their positions, and they had to be paid for every single month they lost work because of that. So that was a decision.
That's fine, but that's different than talking about like the intentions, right?
Well, no, but that aligns with what the intentions might be, because first of all, it's not that, again, even there, it's not that crazy to think of like how lobbyists can move some things around, how people with the government can collude with, like, because they do make money too, right? So it's like, it's not that crazy of a thought. Like the amount of fuckery that happened so far between the government and big pharma is not, it makes it very, very plausible to think in these terms. I accept everything you're saying, and I even lean more towards, it's more just, you know, happenstance versus like a big conspiracy. But I do have to give the feeling that the very real feeling that I had some due of like, dude, this is like, if they wouldn't be pushing it on me that way, I would probably just go and do it. You know what I mean? Like it felt too like aggressive in the way that it was rolled out.
Because it had to. So the thing is, I don't think we're very used to like, you know, exponentials in real life, and everybody, well, not everybody, but many people were like thinking, well, this is not that bad. This is not that bad, until it's truly terrifying, right? So let me just put a couple of things in there. One is, I think it would help to not have, because that speech about controversies and pharma and so on is very natural and prevalent, more in the US, I think, than in Spain. Once, because lobbies are just legal, right? Like literally in the US, you can try to buy the government, right? It's fine.
Or influence,
So try to buy is influence. No? And to just because of what you said, free, like this kind of like focus on individual freedom more than on like what's good for the collective, right? So it's more towards the individual. I think both have merits, but I've lived half of my life here in Europe and half of my life in the US, so I think I can at least like see from both sides. How would you explain that exactly the same thing that happened in the US happened in Europe too, right? Like there's less incentive, the pharma company is not there, it's not that easy to buy the government, there's very many, like, I mean, if it had been one country versus another, then okay, but then at some point you just have to go to like some kind of demigod of pharma that can influence everybody. So that's one thought. And the second one is that I think there's a much easier explanation, which is, and it also is a problem, but it doesn't involve money, right? So once that you, as a politician or government, but specifically as a politician, because the government is just like, it goes across, but there's an elected government at the time, right? For you to take the decision of not to vaccinate people, right? Or of stopping giving boosters, of reducing the precautions, there's very little for you to earn in terms of political outcomes, right? So, and that's why I think, I mean, like in Spain, and that's, it's not even about the vaccines, it's about the masks. We were wearing masks.
Doing something.
Forever.
Yeah, and they do nothing, basically.
Because what is the incentive for the government to say, you don't have to wear it, right? Like, if nothing happens, they didn't win much. If something happens, whatever, or however, and you end up getting a new outbreak, you're just going to be in a terrible position, right? So I think like once we get into the mode of, okay, there are measures that are difficult, that haven't been taken before, that do kind of like eat into your freedom as an individual for the collective. Once you are there, I mean, that's already done. You already have like something that is inconvenient, but tolerated. And removing that is a very difficult decision. And I don't think that's on the human beings that are at this particular time in the government. I think this is just the nature of the system, right? So if you have something that can be slightly good or terrible, depending on which way you go, you are going to go for the one that is safer,
slightly good. Yeah. So basically, just to see if I get your point correctly, is that basically the government has to show that it's doing something, otherwise it kind of renders itself completely irrelevant, which will cost it a lot in the next election cycle, and probably in many other ways as well. So the mask is a perfect example, because we know that aside from the M3s that didn't exist after about a month, because there was not enough of them, masks really basically don't do anything, and you can demonstrate it easily by just blowing smoke through it, right? And smoke particles are much larger than whatever coronavirus particles are. But it was more I think it's actually something that Joe Rogan said, which I think is true. It's basically a way of saying, look, I'm playing the game. Like I'm playing by the rules that we set. So basically you put the mask, and I still see it today, like sometimes people like walking with a mask. I think it's less because they're concerned. It's more like to show that they're a particular kind of person. And I think the government basically implemented a lot of these rules. You're saying that the government implemented a lot of these rules is because if something will go wrong, it will go terribly wrong. Mm-hmm. And if this can do even a tiny bit of difference, at least they did something.
Yeah. Even if it didn't do anything, at least they were telling you to do something, right? Like even if it wasn't effective, what's the downside? Like there's not, right? Like I mean, you already have.
It fucked up my beard for a long time. It was fine. It had like a dent in my beard. That's a
terrible.
It is. It's
I mean, there are downsides, and we don't know. We don't know many things. Like I mean, kids, babies that were born at that time that have not seen faces for the first year. That's not a great thing, right? But anyhow, there are very. Yeah, I think that the calculus they did there. I don't know that I would have done something different, right? Like, oh, why are you keeping like the mask for a year more? Why are you telling me about the booster? Well, because the risk is great, and also, right, I do need to look like I'm doing all I can, and
I see. That makes sense. Okay, yeah, that's very informative. But you're saying that I mean, you can't know for sure, but you're saying that as far as you know, with that technology, the chances that it's going into DNA and changing some fundamental thing is very low.
I mean, unless there are mechanisms that we don't know about. And again, I don't think there's been more testing in production, testing in real life.
Just as far as like the number of people that this was applied to.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So if we all grow tails in 20 years, then we'll know.
It could be fun.
Okay, so in the service of also respecting your time, there's a couple more things I really wanted to pick your brain about. As far as your career, we can run through it real quick. You after the RNA testing, you went into a company that tried to create tools to help big investment firms make wiser calculations as it influences third world countries. Is that correct? Or
not just third world countries. So basically, there's a thing called externalities. So in economics, right? So if you have economic activity, there are some things that don't get into the price, right? That are called externalities. So, for example, if I am, and I mean, taxes and like there's a number of ways in which we try to introduce these things in, right? So, for example, if vehicles, kill pedestrians or produce more contamination and like greenhouse gases and so on, you can try to. Like when you are buying the car, you are not paying for that, you are paying for the car, unless in some way you are including that into the price, right? So the question is, how do you measure those externalities? So the Clarity AI, what it tried to do, because there's two different things that it does. One is measuring impact, right? So the consequences of your economic activity. So, for example, like if you are as an investor, if you want to minimize the negative impact of your portfolio, you have an oil company. You still want to keep an oil company, but like one that is more responsible with the environment, one that is that has better treatment of human beings. Whatever it might be, but you want to put all of that in one number. So you want to, if it's possible,
you give it a score,
right? But based on one number, right? So I mean, how do you trade off, a company that doesn't have good, doesn't respect the rights of its employees, but is great for the tropical rainforest, right? Like, because they do a lot of reforestation, but you need to make one decision. So you need one number because you want to rank them or trade-off. So anyhow, that part is like measuring impact, and we had like the platform is there, and they are growing, and it's not there anymore. Like a software platform that lets you kind of like measure, report, and optimize the sustainability of your portfolio. So one is a measure of impact, right? And that's what I was describing. And there's another one that is very popular now, which is ESG. It's environmental, social, and governance. So ESG metrics are something that many investors are interested in, but they are different than impact. So impact is about like what's the the difference in the world, like these externalities that are not captured in the price. So like if you want to make a better world, you should optimize for impact, right? ESG is about the consequences of those impacts into the company itself. So like if I'm a company with bad that uses too much CO2, right, to produce vehicles. If that company is in China, that has almost no consequences for the company because regulation is lax, right? If that company is in the US or in Europe, that company is going to have a harder time because there are consequences to that, and eventually they'll have to either invest a lot in changing their production or paying more carbon taxes or whatever it is. So ESG is it's very used. Impact, no, not so much. But we were measuring both, right? So that's what the company was about, all through different types of data and like trying to create like a framework to measure these things in a consistent way across industries, sectors.
On that point of creating a healthier, greener industries or more caring industries, let's call them, it might be too broad of a question, but from everything you're observing, would you say that there's a strong uptake in how aware even the very large companies are about their impact on the environment and all that stuff, and not just in terms of regulations, but more in terms of like what's right? Or do you feel that we're not quite there? Like we need a lot of regulation to really bend their arm to care about that stuff?
My position is that we'll never be there. Because that's just not the incentive of a company, right? Like, meaning it's a nice, like, I don't question the intentions of some leaders, but I also know that, especially for a public company, unless you are incorporated as a kind of like B type company, B corporation, where you already say that profit is not your main goal, so that you can actually defend decisions that are not necessarily profit maximizing to your board and to your investors, right? But those are few and unclear to me. There will be more, it will be great, but that's not what most corporations are. At that point, you cannot even try to, so if you have a decision as a business owner or responsible executive because you are not the owner, you are facing a decision where you have to trade off profit for impact, is your fiduciary duty to go for profit, right? Because your investors are expecting that in return. And you could argue that, and this is an argument that is sometimes done, and especially as like public opinion and political regulation changes towards more focus on sustainability, you can argue that, okay, well, short term, we might be sacrificing some profit, but it's a long term better decision, because whatever it is, right? But those type of like long term thinking are difficult to defend if your board starts like it's just a matter of opinion. So profit is real, future is uncertain. So no. So I think it's more about like government and public like opinion. Like, you know, everybody's voting with their money every day. So as market shifts, well, at least like the demand side of the market shifts, companies will adapt, as they've been doing since forever, right? But I don't think I don't even think it should be on the business leaders to make that decision, right? Because I think there's the tyranny of the few, and I've never voted for the president of Warner Brothers or whatever big company.
I think this is the last thing I want to talk about, but it's a really interesting one. We touched on it a little bit. The whole, you know, whatever you want to define as AI in general. There's all these fun rumors right now that you know, maybe ChatGPT will be a full-fledged AGI and that kind of stuff. And you get a very broad spectrum of opinions, even in the field. But usually people who are close to the field, from my experience watching interviews and things like that, a lot of them would tell you that we're very far from what we imagine artificial general intelligence to be. But then now I do hear a little bit more, even from Sam Altman. I don't know if it's more to kind of sell the product, but you get these hints where the level of good starts dancing with general application. What's your opinion about that? So you're very close to this field, both because you also converted eventually to being a full-fledged applicable mathematician. That you just went into that full force. You use machine learning all the time. From everything you're observing, how likely is it that in the next 2 or 3 years we will see something like that?
Well, let's talk about, again, poorly defined, right? So what are the risks, right? So like, because I think that's what gets people
the risks.
Yeah, meaning.
Well, no, we can even define. You can define.
I think so. It's difficult to define what artificial general intelligence is, right? But like, broadly speaking, it should be something, whatever method or combination of methods. It doesn't actually matter, but it's some software or hardware that is able to have at least the level of and this would be like the definition that I'm trying to build it by, like right now, that has kind of like comparable or superior reasoning abilities, sensing abilities than human, because
so that's an important part of the definition. I personally don't think that what people right now mean by artificial general intelligence, I don't necessarily see that it must have an inner world or experience. Yeah. It doesn't have to have consciousness. It can still be general intelligence.
Exactly. Yeah. Agreed. No. But it doesn't even have to be like a human. That's it.
Well, by the way, I think that if it would have consciousness, it would be nothing like a human. Because the pool of the repertoire of things that it is influenced by is very different than human. Yeah. It's not a physical environment. There's so many different variables. There's so many different dimensions it's interacting with.
Yeah.
So
it depends. No, like if you
instantiated a physical body.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's the point. That but even then, like what I think is like we're very far from even being able to decide whether something has an internal experience, right? Like we are going to have to judge by its outputs.
Well, I think it's infinitely far away because I don't even know if you're conscious, right? So it's kind of like,
Exactly.
yeah.
That's about. Like, I don't know if you're conscious. There's no way I'm going to know if ChatGPT is. Doesn't matter. But I just, again, I don't think these things are defined, right? So, meaning, what are the reasons that you talk about artificial general intelligence? Right? Because it's kind of like a moving. Like, all the time we are like moving the goalposts because the thing keeps progressing, right? And we are getting more and more impressive results, more complex behaviors. There are things like that used to be, and I was just reading like last week, that used to be one of the things that was supposed to be uniquely human, right? Like, so we are like going through creativity. We are way past that. Now we are thinking about like theory of mind, right? Like meaning the ability to infer kind of like emotional states or intention, right? Like irony used to be like something that was very difficult for LLMs. They were already not necessarily LLMs, but like for
LLMs are large language models, just for the audience.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So like now they will build these gigantic models.
Like ChatGPT.
Exactly. ChatGPT and ChatGPT 4. So it used to be a very difficult thing to do, to detect irony, right? Like in
videos and in
speech. Right? In text, like a tweet isn't ironic or not. Now looks like we are like the last kind of like LLMs are as good as humans in detecting it. But now how much can you read into that? Not much, but they're good at detecting it. So they start to have theory of mind. They are very competent in pretty much everything that we throw at them, right? They are better than us in detecting cats in videos in YouTube, which is a very valuable skill.
No, the new ones, they can detect a lot of things, like the logic of a scene, like all that stuff.
Exactly. And I mean, like there's a number of reasons to think that the kind of like the internal representations that they are creating are very, very complex. So have we arrived yet there? I don't know, because I don't know what.
So let me define what I think is the main conversation is around. First of all, the main reason why the common folk, like why most people care about that stuff, is because of movies, right? About things like Skynet and like the potential dangers of AI.
Yeah.
But really, in practical terms, can ChatGPT decide on its own without a prompt? Decide all of a sudden, you know what? I want to change something about my own code, or I want to change something about something in the internet. I think that's where decision making without a prompt is where you start dancing with that, what we call like AGI, right? Even if it doesn't have consciousness. And I'll give you my 5 cents there, and I think I told you this before. My conviction is that there's something fundamental about in existence itself, that the central agent, the conscious being, no matter how little or much it influences any future decisions, this inner representation of the world, it is something fundamental. And I do think that what we see now, even the most advanced AI tool, they're just extensions of us, and we'll eventually, when we'll start integrating them either through Neuralink or some other tools that might arise that actually work, they will start realizing, oh, that thing we were afraid of, that thing we thought about, that's us. We are that AGI. These are just extensions, and now we're learning how to slowly integrate them. Because if you think about, for example, not typing in, but like having a ChatGPT 5 or 6 or 7 writing in your brain in real time, like just think about the level of the size of meaning that you can interact with in real time, where you can, like analyze a whole article in like less than a second, and then you're like, and then because of the temporal dimension, because of how fast you saw the meaning of this article, and therefore you committed it to memory in this amount of time, and then you can also see the amount of meaning in this article, and you can do 5 at once. And because you do it in a temporal unit that before was impossible to you, because you forget a little bit of what you read and then you have to kind of connect. But here, all at once, I totally see how the level of meaning that you can interact with just grows to like a place that was inconceivable before, and therefore the types of conclusion you're going to be able to is going to be like of a much higher caliber, right? So this is highly hypothetical, but this is just to illustrate that I do think that actually this is where it's going, where we will be able, and then not even to talk about like merging minds and, you know, thinking together into a shared space and all that stuff. That's where I think it's going. I don't think there's going to be a person in a machine that wakes up. Maybe, I don't know, but I do think that there's something about the wetware of how we're made that is almost like, if you want to ask the question, what would it take to instantiate like an actual experiencing unit in the physical space? The answer is this. That's what it takes. And then this also created extra tools for itself to now upgrade itself, basically. That's how I view the vision. And now you play off of that. Like, what do you, so the margin is where can these tools start making decisions without a prompt, either into the internet or onto itself? First of all, do you think that's possible anytime soon?
I don't think that's the risk. I mean, I think the risk is more what we are already seeing, which is that the prompt is a very poor way of defining what you can and cannot do. That language is ambiguous, limited, and also there are interesting things that happen when, but this happens to humans as well, when you tell somebody or something, in this case, not to do something. In order to say that, you have to put the idea of what not to do in their mind, right?
Can you explain more what you mean by that?
So this like Waluigi problem. So there's an interesting article about that. At the point is that as you describe to the system what not to do in the prompt, you get the kind of like the internal representation closer and closer to that thing that it doesn't have to do, so it's almost more likely that it doesn't. And we are getting very good at like putting like boundaries on that. But in any case, the misspecification of prompts is always going to be a problem because it's a problem for humans. Like, I mean, it's not specific of ChatGPT. It's language is like a poor, like low bandwidth way that we talk, because we already agree on a lot of untold principles ourselves, right? And there's much more miscommunication. As you travel, you get a lot of miscommunication when you talk to somebody from a different culture, from a different upbringing, and so on. ChatGPT doesn't have any of that. Well, ChatGPT, I don't want to just do, or Claude, or whichever other like LLM that you are trying to interact with. So that is going to be a problem always. And as you give access to to get like real world resources to the LLMs, that will still be a problem, right? And I think there's already cases of like the LLM trying to hire humans to solve problems. There is a marketplace for humans that you can connect to the LLMs. So there's going to be decisions being made. There's going to be money being moved, because obviously as we use these systems for planning and so on, that's just going to happen. But I don't think the big risk is the LLM is changing, like, for starters, like changing the code is not even a thing that matters, right? So because the code,
well, it's interesting if all of a sudden it decides to improve its own code without anyone ever telling him to do that. That's interesting. I'm not saying dangerous.
That's very unlikely. You could tell it to improve its code. That, I think, if we get good enough at coding, and they already like most engineers now use Copilot or something similar to help them code. But before they were using Stack Overflow or any other web page. I mean, this is an infinitely better kind of experience when it works. But you always have the question of like, how do I know this is the good way, right? Like it's, and that gets me to the other part of what you were saying, which is that this is going to be an extension of us. I don't think in this iteration that will happen at all. Like I think it's actually making us farther away.
In the next iteration or in general? You know,
in this particular kind of like implementation, which is like this kind of like chatbots, LLMs and so on, because it's actually, I mean, for me, it looks like it's doing exactly the opposite, right? Because we are more and more delegating through this poor, narrow kind of like interface we have, which is speech. I read much faster than I talk, right? And I write much faster than I speak. Well, I read much faster than I listen, and I talk slower than I write, right? So I think, if anything, even though it's delegating tasks, I don't think it's helping us getting better insight, right? I think insight and
right now when we're not connected to it.
Exactly.
What I'm talking about is not going to be through speech. It's going to be through just thinking. Yeah. So the speed of thought is the thing that's going to determine how fast you understand this or that. Yeah. The commands are not going to be through speech.
Yeah, and we'll see.
They're going to be through internal wiggle, the same one that gives you the ability to speak. And I think that's the level that I'm talking about. I'm not talking about like intermediary stages, like none of that stuff. And in that sense, I do think it can get you better. If you're only delegating, then the machine in the middle gets dumber. But if you learn how to interact with larger levels of meaning all at once, then you get better, because you can now literally function on a level that you couldn't before. So the function in the middle is still the same, like the thing that grows into, like, you know, if you study something or all that stuff, that thing that is being molded in the middle gets better. But the tools through which it gets better, it's like Einstein said, me and my pencil are much smarter than just myself, right? Because by the fact that you have this external tool, now you can say with a calculator, well, it would just make you dumber because you're just asking the calculator to calculate everything for you. That's how you use it. But if you are now interacting with like some crazy theories and you just need a second to like do this one calculation that just like would take you, I don't know, 2 weeks on a paper, it doesn't make you dumber. You just, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
so it really depends on how we use it.
I do, and I think it will come down. So even if you have like a better interface, I don't know which way it will go.
That's for sure.
Because you can be implicitly assuming that the only thing that is stopping us from having more knowledge is the speed at which we can get it in. I don't know that that's true, right? Like knowledge requires a lot of repetition, a lot of like until you actually like kind of integrate it. So I think it will depend on, and I don't know which way it will go, on whether our, you know, incredibly plastic learning machines that we have can or cannot find a way to use the whatever we put in there, because it could be the internet at this point. It doesn't matter. Like it could be an LLM or not. Like the LLM is good because it lets you parse through a lot of information and summarize it, right? But like if you could actually connect yourself to the whole repository, maybe your brain can do something with that. I don't know. But the point is, can it or can it not kind of like coordinate activities so that it actually offloads the learning to the other thing you are connecting it to, right? Because if you cannot, then that's you know, like, but we don't know that, and there's amazing examples of plasticity, right, for the brain. So like if you can connect it with enough high speed, you can learn. I know you can learn how to interpret vision with sound. You can learn, which is in theory, like you can learn a lot of things that don't seem possible. So we don't know, right? But whether so that's kind of like separate. I think it's enticing to think that everything that sounds futuristic goes together, but I'm not sure that that's the case.
No, I'm not sure it's going to be like this rosy, perfect scenario. It might be a complete disaster. I'm just saying that to me, just clear. I don't know why, but it's clear that there's not going to be a person rising in a machine. I guess that was more my point.
Yeah. I think the risk for all these things is actually, I think, what's in him? Harari, right?
Yuval Noah Harari, yeah.
Harari says that the problem is not that the machines or the bots are going to get really smart. It's that we don't know us, right? So it's actually and we are not very objective. So it's actually easy to manipulate somebody from the outside because they don't have a lot of awareness. I think that's true of all of us. No matter how hard you try, you're just seeing yourself without. So getting these systems in the world, and the problem is not the Skynet scenario for me. Is first of all conflating or making it very difficult to know what's real. That's a very, first we moved almost all reality to the internet, so that's where like all your news sources are and like where most of the people get their news. And now you cannot trust any video, any text, any image, right? And that's a real issue that I don't know how to solve, but it's not because of the system getting conscious or of the system getting disobedient or that, right? So that's
the danger is still mostly us.
Yeah, it is us. It's always been us.
So to use Yuval Noah Harari's line at the end of *Sapiens*, he ends it, I believe, with the line, "There's nothing more dangerous than gods who don't know what they want." As some closing words, in your wise opinion, what should we want? Should we, obviously keep advancing in our technology, but should we do this more? Should we do the inwardly focused, understanding ourselves thing more?
Yeah, I think in a way, as we just since we want to be on LLMs, I think it's interesting that the more we create things that behave like us, the more we are almost forced to ask ourselves what we are, right? Like meaning like you think that a human is this, but then as I was saying, like you get less and less convinced that that's what makes you special, right? So I do think that we should definitely look to ourselves more, but we should be progressing. I think like technology is always, the faster it moves, the scarier it gets, and it's only getting faster, and I don't think that's stoppable. So we have to get used to this kind of like relentless progress. It won't be even, right? And specifically talking about like AI, there's always this kind of like spurts of growth, of fast development, followed by winters, and then the next one. So it won't be even, but I think it's going to be very interesting what's coming in the future. I don't know the number of years, but at the same time, this kind of like rapid advance in technology requires more awareness on our side, right? Because technology can move much faster than culture can, than regulation can, and that's the work we have to do. I think that's the biggest risk, that technology goes just faster than we can prepare our children, than we can prepare our governments, than we can prepare our social systems, our media, right? So that's I think the best way of trying to brace ourselves for what can be amazing in the future. Yeah.
Great way to end this episode. I really appreciate you took the time, brother. It was fascinating, and maybe we'll do it again sometime.
Okay, thank you.